After starting the LaMelo Ball era in Charlotte with back-to-back playing appearances, the Hornets have had a rough few years. Under their previous front office and Michael Jordan, there wasn't really any good process and it really felt like they were getting nowhere. But ever since Jeff Peterson has become the head of the snake, the Charlotte Hornets have become one of the most productive front offices in the NBA. They just had a 2025 draft class, which will install a lot of high IQ, complementary players next to LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller and fit Charles Lee's system to a T. I think there's substance and I think there's hope in Charlotte. And for the first time in a while, I think they might be one of the most fun teams in the NBA. In Charles Lee's first season, he made it pretty obvious. He wants the Hornets to emulate the Celtics system. What I mean by this is driving and kicking and creating a lot of wide open threes and beating teams by the sheer volume of 3-pointers they get up. Now, the issue last season was they didn't really have the personnel to run the system. Outside of LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller, none of these players were really ready for volume 3-point shooting. Factor in the fact that their role players weren't really quick decision makers or natural ball handlers, it became really tough to run and a lot of the offense was sloppy last season. But now, they finally have installed some personnel from their rookies in Colin Sexton. But before we talk about the system and what the Hornets want to do, the most important thing for the Hornets this season is how LaMelo Ball progresses. LaMelo is obviously a very talented playmaker, and for the first time in a while, I think he has some good offensive structure around him. First, you have Colin Knuppel and Brandon Miller as some complementary offensive wings around him, but more importantly, you finally have some ball handling and secondary decision making. First, you have Trey Mann if he stays healthy, but more importantly, Colin Sexton, who was a great addition to his team. But entering year 6, I want to see some more maturity in LaMelo Ball's shot selection. I think last year he had to shoot a lot of 3-pointers out of necessity, so I'm not really blaming him for being inefficient in that situation, but I do think with some more offensive structure, maybe LaMelo should go to like a pass-first type of player. I think the biggest weakness with LaMelo Ball right now is that he isn't good enough as a finisher, he's not physical enough, he doesn't get to the line enough. He needs to find a way to become more of a downhill force to become more efficient. His finishing has been a huge struggle over the course of his career, and I think it's the biggest thing holding him back from becoming a true all-NBA type of player. But even if that finishing doesn't transpire, there's still a lot of ways where LaMelo can be an all-NBA type of player. Darius Garland almost made it by just being his high IQ playmaker while also being an efficient volume shooter. And I mean, LaMelo has all the skills. He has the volume 3-point shooting, he has the ball handling to create a lot of open shots. And more importantly, he can play with a certain type of pace that you just don't see from 6'6" point guards. He's very good in transition. He's very good at slowing it down in the half court. He's a very methodical player. I think going into next season, there's a much better chance he can put it all together because now he doesn't have to have that 40% usage rate he had to begin last year. He will have other ball handlers, hopefully, unless someone gets injured. Sexton is someone who really excites me next to LaMelo Ball because he's such a good downhill force. He's so good at getting to the rim and drawing pressure that he's a good complement while he can also shoot and space up the floor in the half court. And I know Colin Sexton has a lot of bad stigma as a playmaker. A lot of people still think he's a ball hog. He doesn't really know how to pass from his Cleveland days. But in Utah, he was actually surprisingly a very solid playmaker. And he's actually the best playmaker that LaMelo Ball will ever play with in Charlotte. And I think having two guards who can drive and kick to that level, both can put a lot of pressure on the rim. Both are very good at making kickouts, especially LaMelo Ball, who's probably one of the best in the league at making those skip passes and making those exterior passes. I think you can really implement that Celtics system and generate a lot of 3-pointers if this goes right. And I know there's a lot of smoke and rumors. Will LaMelo Ball request out of Charlotte? I'm not buying that at all. I'm not saying that. But there's definitely some pressure this season. Entering year 6, this is definitely a season where you want to see some progression out of LaMelo and Charlotte itself. You don't want to be in the same situation. You want to at least show some hope. I don't think it's a do or die. The Hornets have to make the playoffs type of year. But I definitely think it's a year where if you're back in the same situation with 18 to 20 wins, it's not going to look so bright. Overall, I want to see LaMelo play a little bit of a scaled down role, not shooting 20 to 25 shots, not having a 40% usage rate, but being a lead playmaker and leading a better offense this year with more offensive talent. I want to see him get around 20 to 22 points per game, maybe double-digit assists. That would be my goal for him, and be slightly more efficient. I mentioned Colin Sexton earlier. I thought that trade was an absolute steal, just dumping Nurkic for him. And I mentioned in an earlier video how combo guards are basically dead, but I thought Colin Sexton was wrongfully done. He's been a really good player for Utah the last few years, and in 2024, he was actually ranked as one of the 40 most impactful offensive players in the NBA. In his career, he's been consistently efficient and low turnover, so he doesn't make a lot of mistakes. And I think for a team like Charlotte that has a lot of erratic offensive players, I think having a stable ball handler, a stable scorer like Sexton is going to be really important for him. He's not very reliant on three-point shooting. He gets very consistent inside buckets. And I'm just excited to see a stable player in Charlotte's system. I'm excited to see LaMelo play with a stable backcourt partner, a player who will be able to relieve pressure off of him. But I do think this leads us to the big weakness of the Charlotte team, and it's their big man rotation. I like Kalkbrenner. He's 7'3", he has a huge wingspan, he's able to impact the game on both ends with his skill and overall size that he takes up. But I do think during Summer League, we saw some of the weaknesses. The lack of foot speed, the lack of overall speed and athleticism definitely popped off the screen. And I think that's why he struggled at times during Summer League. And I definitely believe in him to an extent. He was one of the most productive players in the country. But relying on a second-round rookie and Mason Plumlee as their big man rotation is definitely very concerning. It might be the worst big man rotation in the NBA, and it just lacks a lot of versatility. And I think this is what hinders the ceiling of this team, especially when you consider there's so much importance on the LaMelo Ball and Colin Sexton pick-and-roll game. When you don't have a really good big, it's going to hurt them a lot. I 100% understand why they traded Mark Williams. He had health issues, he had a bad motor, he had bad defensive moments, but I definitely thought they were going to do more to try to find more big options, but they didn't really do that. I do want to mention Musa Diabate. He had some really good defensive flashes to end last season. Maybe that's the guy they believe in, but as of right now, I'm just really confused what their plan is for the big man rotation. Now, one of the most important players on this team, the number 2 overall pick in the 2023 draft, Brandon Miller. They picked him over Scoot Henderson, which was controversial at the time, but so far it's aged pretty well. He averaged 21 points per game in his sophomore season before getting the season-ending injury. Similar to LaMelo, I thought he was overtasked as a secondary playmaker this season, especially when LaMelo and Tre Mann both got injured. He was asked to be a primary playmaker. He was asked to be a primary ball handler when that's not really his role. He's more of an off-ball scorer, more of a player who can do 1-2 dribble pull-ups, movement shooting, stuff like that. He's one of the most talented shooters in the world. 6'8", can shoot at any spot, off any type of movement, any type of footwork, from any range. That's more of his role. That's what you want him to do. Be a pure volume shooter, not be a primary creator, be a primary decision maker for your team. I think there's a lot of next steps Brandon Miller can take. There's a lot of improvement points. I think number 1 is his overall finishing and his ability inside the arc. He can find ways to generate better looks for himself. He has a really nice frame. He moves pretty well. He should find ways to get deeper in the paint, find ways to get better rim looks than he does currently. Again, I think him shifting his focus to more off-ball scoring and becoming a guy who can attack off closeouts to get all the way to the rim or score inside the arc would be a lot better than him trying to score on the ball in the pick and roll. Now, if Brandon Miller is going to take a huge step in his overall impact going forward, I think it has to come defensively. He has the overall frame, he has the size, he has the movement, but right now, he's just really bad on screens. And I do think the Hornets are using him in the wrong role. He's not really a point of attack defender. He's not really a guy who can get over screens, but he's going to have to find a way to use that frame and maybe be an impactful wing defender. I talked about Brandon Miller on the ball and his overall playmaking responsibilities earlier, and I really think that'll pay dividends down the line, him being forced to be a primary playmaker. I think he showed fairly improved playmaking in his first 2 seasons in the NBA. And next to Charlotte's primary ball handlers and LaMelo Ball, Tre Mann, and Colin Sexton, I think they'll have two wings in Brandon Miller and Colin Knuppel, who will be really talented shooters, but also be able to make their own decisions with the ball in their hands, be able to connect and flow the offense. Look at these results. People are making thousands every month betting on sports completely risk-free. The secret? They're using OddsJam. Here's how. OddsJam uses a strategy called arbitrage, finding odds discrepancies across the sportsbooks. You bet both sides, and no matter the outcome, you will profit. Here's an example. If you bet $500 on Boise State to win on FanDuel and $345 on their opponent San Francisco on DraftKings, you're guaranteed to make $50 win or lose. It's that simple. And you just have to get started. Use code FOCUS for 35% off and a 7-day free trial. I guarantee you'll profit during the trial, and if you don't, just cancel in one click, no questions asked. And this brings me to my favorite prospect in this year's NBA draft, Colin Knuppel out of Duke, and I think he has a real chance to be the best rookie this season outside of Cooper Flagg. Contrary to popular belief, I think Charlotte is a perfect fit for Knuppel and his style of play. I mentioned earlier how Charles Lee wants to create a lot of three-point shots, he wants to do a lot of driving kicking, and Colin Knuppel does that perfectly. Day one, Knuppel will be an elite shooter from any spot on the floor, but again, the number one thing he brings is he helps bring structure and overall cohesion to this Hornets offense. He's a player who rarely ever makes mistakes with the ball in his hands. He's a player who's almost always in the right spot. He's a player who is one of the most efficient players in the country. He's just going to help overall elevate the offense in any way possible. I kept a close eye on Knuppel in Summer League, and after struggling in his first game, he showed a lot of reasons on both ends why he should be higher on his ceiling than he probably previously were. He showed a lot more on-ball capabilities than I previously thought. He looked comfortable in the mid-range, he looked comfortable coming off screens and creating his own shot, but also he looked really good on defense. Like he was the best defender on multiple Summer League games. I never thought Knuppel was a bad defender. In fact, I always said he was a pretty good team defender because of how smart he is and how he's always in the right spot. But what he did in Summer League was beyond impressive. He was flying around the floor, making right rotations. He was basically anchoring the defense purely off IQ and overall speed. And no disrespect, but when you have players like LaMelo Ball and Miles Bridges who have been really bad technically on defense the last few years, seeing some hope in their top pick in Colin Knuppel and seeing him fight this much and making the right play is extremely encouraging, and maybe it can help establish a new culture. More than likely, I think Knuppel will come off the bench this season, at least to begin, but I think there's a real chance that he ends up being one of Charlotte's 4 or 5 best players by the end of the season. I think Charles Lee will absolutely love the optionality and versatility that Knuppel brings to the table, but more importantly, I think he can help expand LaMelo's game as a true playmaker. The sheer amount of shooting between your top 3 prospects or players and LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller, and Colin Knuppel is insane. That might be one of the best shooting trios we've seen in the league in a long time. And like I said earlier, not only does Knuppel have an extremely high floor, I would be shocked if he's not a good NBA starter in a few years. He also has some sneaky potential because of how high his feel is, how well he's able to get to spots. There's a chance he could become a legit good on-ball player. Maybe someone like a Gordon Hayward on the ball where he's capable of playing through the mid-range, capable of playing through his shooting and his overall handle. Now, I've praised the Hornets a lot in this video and I've talked pretty positively about them. But the one situation or player I really don't understand is Miles Bridges, and this doesn't have to do anything with the off-court stuff. I just don't really understand the on-court fit. At this point in his career, Miles Bridges has shown no adaptability in being anything other than a high-volume on-ball scorer. I think he has some potential as a play finisher, as an off-ball scorer, but he clearly isn't suited for that role. I don't hate every player who's a volume scorer, every player who's a score-first player, but I don't think he's smart enough to require having the ball that much. I want to surround LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller with high IQ, complementary role players. I don't really want a third scorer. I don't really want another creator, another player who requires the ball in their hands. Colin Sexton can do the secondary scoring and secondary playmaking. And the thing is, Miles Bridges kind of disrupts the flow of the offense and also hurts you on defense. That's what makes him really hard to justify. His attacks and isolations take way too long to get into. He's just overall too slow when he's trying to create, and I just don't think he fits into what Charles Lee and LaMelo are trying to establish. He has 2 years left on his deal. The deal is pretty movable. I'd like to see him try to upgrade off of him or try to make a move sometime this trade deadline or maybe next offseason. I don't really want to see Miles Bridges as a long-term player in Charlotte. Now going back to things I don't really understand about Charlotte, Tajane Saloon at number 6 last year, completely never understood for even 1 second. I mean, sitting at number 6 in the 2024 draft, I know it was a weak one. I just thought it was a weird time to take that type of swing, especially when pick number 7 was Donovan Clingan and center was a need for the Charlotte Hornets. If I squint really hard, I can see some of the rationale, dribble, pass, shoot, wing, 18 years old, from France. Maybe there's some upside there. But when I watched him pre-draft in 2024, he just didn't really look that athletic. He wasn't a skilled shooter. He wasn't a true ball handler. I really just didn't know what his true skills were. He kind of just seemed like everything was an idea. Like, there's some swings that make sense. Think about Bilal Coulibaly in the 2023 draft when the Wizards took him at pick number 7. That made a lot of sense because he looked like a special athlete. He had a special type of twitchiness. When I watched Tajane, there was really nothing special. There was really no special trait there. And I understand Tajane was a long-term project. It really wasn't something we're going to get an answer on 1 year out. But still, I really never saw the rationale from day one. And right now, I haven't seen anything that really changes my mind or sees anything special in him. I talked about Burner and Knuppel, but one of my favorite players is also Liam McNeely. He was top 20 on my board. And similar to Knuppel, he brings a lot of similar skills. Good decision-making, good connected passing, but also very high-volume three-point shooting. He's an absolutely insane shooter. He can shoot off any type of movement, any type of speed. And I've talked about it so much in this video, but I'm so excited to see how good of a shooting team this Hornets team can become next season. The entire rotation is filled with positive to elite shooters. Now, one of the best value contracts in this offseason was signing Tre Mann on a 3-year, $24 million contract. He obviously got injured, so he didn't really have a lot of leverage in negotiations, but I thought this was a great deal for Charlotte. Not much risk at all, but a lot of high upside because Tre Mann shows a lot of upside every single time he plays. He's one of the most talented space creators in the NBA. Almost every single time he has the ball in his hands, he can create a good shot. His step back three is absolutely lethal. And if you're just trying to have some fun, watch some hezzies, watch some step backs, watch some snatchbacks, you're going to have a lot of fun watching Tre Mann. But beyond that, he's also improved a lot as an overall player. He's become a really solid playmaker with Charlotte. After All-Star break last season, when a lot of the Hornets team was injured, he averaged 4.5 assists to 2 turnovers and showed a lot of pick and roll craft and ability to just be a steady creator with the ball in his hands. But the main thing for Tre Mann is that if he wants to stay on the floor, he has to be a really good shooter. And he shot 40% in the first 13 games this season with Charlotte. Really good catch and shoot shooter. His pull-up shooting started to flash, and you can see why there's a lot of enticing upside with him. And if Tre Mann can sustain that level of shooting, he'll be a real 6th Man of the Year contender very, very soon. I think we're going to see a lot of very fun 3-guard lineups, 2-guard lineups with Tre Mann, Colin Sexton, and LaMelo Ball, all of them playing together. They all bring so many different skills to the table. But I do think this brings us to one of the biggest weaknesses on this overall team outside of the big play, and that's just the lack of perimeter defense and overall defensive prospects. Colin Sexton and Tre Mann show a lot of effort on defense, but between them and LaMelo, that's a really bad defensive guard trio. If Grant Williams can come back from his ACL injury healthy, he'd be a pretty good small ball 5 option to really help compensate the lack of defensive identity on this team. And there's been multiple stretches towards the end of the season where the Hornets really find their defensive flow and become a really solid team defense. Last season, after the trade deadline, when they got Grant Williams as a small ball 5, they showed a lot of promise and were a top 10 defense for a couple months. But I do think the lack of point of attack defense and overall on-ball defense will eventually catch up to them. I think Josh Green's pretty solid, but he's really bad on offense and he's not an amazing defender, so he's not really worth playing too many minutes. I think realistically, the Hornets will have Colin Sexton or Brandon Miller as their primary point of attack defender in the starting lineup minutes. Now, this brings me to some projections for this team. For the starting lineup, obviously, I have LaMelo Ball starting at point guard. Shooting guard is really tough. They have multiple options. Do they start the rookie Colin Knuppel? Do they go with their defensive guy in Josh Green? Do they go with a ball handler in Trey Mann? Or do they just go with Colin Sexton? I think ultimately they want more ball handling, but they also want some veteran and stable scoring, so they go Colin Sexton, who can also probably play a decent amount of defense. At small forward, they will start their franchise wing, Brandon Miller, and at the power forward, I think they'll still go back to Miles Bridges. Center's another tough position to predict, but I think they're going to go with a familiar returning face in Moussa Diabate. I think the Hornets are going to change their starting lineup a lot this season. It's going to be very fluid, especially shooting guard and center, but I think to start the season, they're going to go with some more veteran presence and some more returning faces. Now, for the win total, I think the Hornets will definitely win over 25 games this season, which is about their line, and I think they have a pretty decent chance to get all the way in the mid to high 30s and maybe sneak into the play-in spot in the Eastern Conference. This season is going to mark a huge stepping stone for the future of Charlotte basketball, and I think for the first time in a while, we're going to see some hope and some signs of improvement. 99% of you guys watching are not subscribed. These videos take a long time, so I'd really appreciate it. I'm doing a video on every single team in the NBA. This was my first of 30 teams. So if you want to stay updated and support, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Leave a like on the video. I really appreciate it. And comment any questions or any thoughts. I appreciate anyone listening. Thank you.